Hello, everyone who's joining. Welcome, welcome. Please feel free to say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're calling in from, what time zone you're in. Good morning, Jeff. Good to see you here. We've got New York City. Welcome. Nice, lots of New York. Welcome, Samantha. Yes, feel free to mention who you're with today, what company you work for, what you're hoping to learn. Would love to learn a little bit more about the audience before we get started. We're going to get started in about a minute. Welcome, Joe and Kim, Julia, Patricia, Samantha. Nice to see you all today. Buenos Aires, we got Denver. Nice. Los Angeles, we've got MediaJel. Awesome. Okay, well, it's 12:03 here, so let's get started. Thank you, everybody, for coming today and giving us your time. We're really excited for this panel and to talk about ad tech and specifically the marketing and advertising space in cannabis. So first, let's bring up our panelists without further ado. We have Gary Allen, the CEO of New Frontier Media. Welcome, Gary.
New Frontier Data, sorry.
Data. We've got, apologies for that. We've got Jake Litke, the CEO of MediaJel. Jake, I apologize if I said your name incorrect.
No, you got it. Hello,
Awesome.
everyone.
Thanks, Jake. Welcome, welcome. We've got Ted, the Director of Demand Partnerships for North America for Smart Ad Server. Welcome, Ted.
Thank you.
Nice to see you all in your jets this morning. And we've got Joe Hodas, the CMO of Wana Brands.
Morning. How you doing, Lisa?
Great. Thank you all for being here. It's good to see your faces. I'm very excited for this conversation. And for the audience today to engage with us in the chat, want to know a little bit more about what specifically you would like to learn. We've got some planned remarks, and then we'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end. But today we're really going to unpack the cannabis marketing space. Cannabis is a really growing industry, if that wasn't obvious already. The total US economic impact from legal cannabis in 2021 is expected to reach 92 billion, up more 30% from last year, and is projected to be upwards of 160 billion in 2025. And that 35% compound annual rate we've been seeing consistently really since the industry started adult use in 2014 here in the States. So things have been moving quickly. And with that is a rapidly evolving regulatory landscape and a rapidly evolving marketing and advertising landscape, and even more emphasis and need on clear marketing best practices in the future as we have more and more brands and retailers entering the space, and an increasing need for consumer education as we have more product innovation coming online as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means, dive into the differences as far as what the legal environment implies for cannabis as well, and we'll talk about what that means for brands in the space, publishers in the space, and those looking to get involved with cannabis marketing as well. So let's get started. And Jake, I'd like to have you start with this question. We're going to keep this conversational, so everyone feel free to chime in. What is the difference between marketing cannabis versus any other CPG product from a regulatory standpoint? So if you're not familiar with the cannabis industry, can you break down the differences between cannabis and any other CPG product?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of differences. And, I'll focus on the US for now. But even within the US, doing advertising is more like operating in, 30 something different countries. Each state has its own set of laws and regulations, and they vary pretty wildly. Some extreme examples are obviously you need to have age control, right? You need to make sure that you're serving ads to the right compliant audience. But those vary a lot. Like in California, it's 71.6% of your audience needs to be over 21, reasonably, gauged. In Colorado, it's 30%, right? So those are very different numbers. In addition to that, you have the actual creative guidelines that exist in terms of what you can and cannot show in a creative, right? So in some states you can show flower, others you can't. In a couple states, if you want to run an ad, you actually have to get it approved by a specific person. Like each ad that you run needs to go across someone's desk in order for you to be able to serve it. So you've got creative issues, you have compliance issues around age, and then you have all of the issues around targeting and privacy, right? So if you're serving ads and you're going to be compliant, you need to know where people are. But in order to know where people are, you need to know things, like IP address or device, all of those type of things. So you additionally have to deal with the normal privacy laws, being a good custodian of consumer data and making sure that you're applying all of those laws as well.
Joe or anyone want to add anything to that? The difference between cannabis and CPG from a marketing perspective?
Well, to what Jake was just saying, I think broadly speaking, you have so many different packaging paradigms and branding elements in each of these markets based on the regulatory environment. So you really can't, it's really challenging to create a systematic and or broad kind of a marketing campaign across multiple markets. A company like Wana, where we are in 11 states, 9 provinces in Canada, there's obviously a pretty wide net that we could cast. However, each individual market has to vary by the simple fact that we can't have the same product in every market. So that becomes a real challenge too, creating that brand consistency when you have such differing elements on a market by market basis.
Gary, are you adding something? Because it looks like you're talking. Go ahead.
The Zoom condition. I think, listen, what Jake was saying is obviously very important. And Joe, as a person that is in charge of creating these marketing campaigns and trying to get his message out, the challenges in cannabis, they are absolutely there. However, I do think that programmatic and data-driven marketing is really the first way to mitigate most of the risk, right? By understanding the privacy, by understanding the location, by understanding not only cannabis consumption, but also the other interests of that cannabis consumer, they allow you to create, and Joe, I'd love for your feedback on this, but they allow you to create messaging and marketing that doesn't seem so stymied, that is a little bit more traditional, because a lot of the compliance pieces can be taken care of through technology.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree from the compliance perspective in terms of targeting your audience and knowing that it's, the proper audience of the cannabis consumers and all that good stuff. Huge advancements over the last, I'd say, 2 years in this space to be able to do that. I think what's interesting, though, to your point, Gary, is that as we develop, we have two sides of this. So I can target, I can find the right consumer, and I can make sure that everything's compliant and all that good stuff. But when I look at a market like, let's say, Oklahoma versus a market like Colorado, because of the development of each of these markets, the Oklahoma consumer, first of all, has a completely different competitive set to look at. But secondly, also has a different level of education and knowledge. It's not as mature of a market as, let's say, Colorado. So I can find those customers, and I still, as the marketer, have the challenge of saying, okay, because each of these markets is developed differently and are at different stages of development from a knowledge standpoint, I have to find different messaging, different ways to connect with those consumers. Not a regulatory issue, truly a marketing issue, but technology can only get me so far as it relates to finding that broad audience.
Absolutely.
And to that point, I want to talk about 280E and sort of ground this conversation in the fact that, generally speaking, marketing is seen, it's a long-term investment. But with cannabis, there are some certain implications with 280E that financially are just different than other industries. So let's see. Joe, would you like to talk with 280E on the brand side and how that impacts you?
Sure. And actually, the 280E, well, first of all, from a baseline for everyone who is not, familiar, it's one of my favorite ironies of this industry. It is the tax code that is used for industries that are not federally recognized or are federally illegal, but the federal government still wants to take that money as a tax and put it into the same banks that we're not currently allowed to use as a cannabis company. So that's why I call it my favorite irony of the industry. But it really is, it's a challenge as it relates to spending dollars. Now, for a brand like Wana, where we're a manufacturer, the one thing about 280E is that you are allowed to deduct cost of goods sold from, and I'm not a tax attorney, so don't take this for gospel, but you're allowed to, as I understand it, deduct cost of goods sold. For other parts of the industry, like retail and cultivation, those rules are going to be a little bit different, and so it becomes really onerous to determine what is or is not, within the marketing budget, part of what you can deduct or what you can't deduct. And my guess is that for many of the companies that have run afoul of 280E and the IRS over the last several years in the cannabis space, a lot of it has come from not really understanding the rules and regs and where to put those marketing dollars. So it does limit our budgets to a certain extent.
I think it's really important, again, what Joe brings up about the difference between the product and brand, the product manufacturer, the brand company, and then the retailer, right? Because 280E does regulate what can be named in cost of goods sold, but and what cannot. For the retailer, it's really difficult to, and I think this is why we brought this up, Lisa. For the retailer, it's really difficult to write marketing off as a business expense. And so for the cannabis retailer, their expenses, that expense line becomes so much larger percentage of all revenue brought in. I do, again, and I really, everybody who knows me on the call will tell you that I'm not usually the eternal optimist, but I will continually bring kind of, the glass is half full to this particular part of the conversation, as we've been tracking it obviously since 2014. It does provide an opportunity for companies like Wana and the retailer to really partner in a very traditional way that other regulated markets have seen, for alcohol, tobacco, which allows companies like Wana, because they are able to write that marketing off in that cost of goods sold line item, for them to be able to offer to those retailers, which helps their brand get more retail space and more retail recognition, but also helps the retailer get their name out there. It does offer a really cool partnering capability that will also push the marketing spend of the industry. And I want to back for 1 second, Lisa. The retail impact number that you quoted is really important for everybody to understand. The retail portion of that impact is about $22 billion. And that makes this industry in the United States alone the 5th largest consumer industry, period. And so that's really important when we're talking about engagement and marketing, right? And having the manufacturers and the retailers come together and form partnerships to do that marketing and engage those consumers, because the more we get out there, the larger the impact of that retail number and that economic impact that you were talking about, Lisa. It's how it grows.
Yeah, I agree with that, Gary, in the sense, we do digital programmatic advertising for a lot of retailers across the US and Canada. And we work with brand partners as well. And where we see the most success for brands is when they do exactly that. When you run co-marketing campaigns, the brand helps sponsor the actual campaign. And then they can, have both the retailer brand and the product brand within the same creative. And then you can drive consumers to that particular retailer, and then you can actually show a return on ad spend.
That's really important.
That was
We lose Lisa?
Maybe for a little, but you know, I think where we are kind of going with that is, you know, it's good transition into more of digital and, you know, the other side of things, you know, where the cannabis industry runs into roadblocks and, you know, is chugging along with where it is, and the size and scope of the total industry continues to grow. But, you know, the challenge in taking that next step to be up there and accepted with others, you know, CPG brands, is the exposure and the awareness of those brands. And from a regulatory standpoint, you know, the other side of the coin is where to run those ads. And so the challenge with that is, you know, picking and choosing and finding the platforms that are scalable. I mean, scale is a challenge for any industry, but in cannabis specifically, because each state also has, you know, its you know, advertising concerns and publishers themselves. I mean, the biggest challenge or concern of a publisher that we run into is validating and, you know, securing that it's going to run within a state that it's allowed to, and that there isn't spillover, so it can come back to them. And there's also, you know, the education topic too, of letting these publishers know, you know, that it's not just the recreational view, that we're talking about everything from CBD for pets to lotions and skincare to, you know, it's a wide spectrum of products. And the concerns are valid. You know, one thing that we've done is made a concerted effort to, you know, show the ads prior to launch. You know, what does the creative look like? And, you know, what can the return be? Because we know that, you know, the revenue is there for these publishers, but it's important to validate that it's going to run in the right place. And the other side of that too is content. Most of the content out there right now is educational. It's you know, the do's and don'ts. I mean, it's more, you know, the WebMD about the actual, you know, side effects of the product itself, not about everything else that can be used. So endemic publishers also run into a challenge themselves of growth, and they're at a point now where monetization is important, because more and more advertisers that come to market want to be around more endemic content. So how do they take that next step? Because financially, to, you know, build out an ad operations team is a large undertaking when you want to focus on good content. So where do you look for that, and to be with the right advertisers? And since cannabis has been deemed or viewed as, you know, illicit drugs, whereas, you know, here at Smart, we view it more as either alternative medicine or for what it actually is within the state that it's legal. It's a CBG product. So, you know, asking publishers to accept it from there, because we know the scale and it'll grow, and then adding more endemic and introducing them into the ad tech landscape and connecting them more. But not every cannabis advertiser wants to just be on an endemic site. They want to be, you know, within the fabric of every other product, and to kind of have that validation. So for both sides, as the product side grows, so does the content side. Because what we've already seen a couple of weeks ago at the PGA Championship, they were running CBD CTV ads. You know, those are expensive. There's not a lot of video ads for cannabis right now because of 280E, because that's a large investment that you have to show return on. So seeing now CTV ads, and then also the branded apparel, makes it more acceptable and more mainstream.
Thanks, Ted. And sorry, everybody, I glitched for a minute. But so I think, to your point, Ted, I'd like to talk a little bit about who the cannabis consumer is. I think that can be something that feels a little nebulous or not clear in a lot of folks' minds. And Gary, I'd like to start with you with this. the basis of any good marketing plan is understanding the consumer profile. Who is the cannabis consumer today, and how complex or simple is this question? And how can we fit it into this discussion of making sure that brands are targeting the right consumers at the right time in the right channels?
It's a great question, and I think that. So it's really important, and actually I'm not going to do a plug for my company, but I'm pulling up our latest consumer report so I can give you some data. We're a data company. Listen, it's really important to understand that less than 15% of the cannabis consumer is the stereotypical mainstream media stoner that everybody thinks we are. This consumer base is the same consumer base that every CPG and company in the world almost is looking for. It's women between the ages of 30 and 55 years old that make more than $100,000. It's the single largest consumer base. Now, that does not mean that men between 25 and 50 years old aren't more active in the retail market. They are more active. And there's a couple of nuances there, right? Men will go to the dispensary or visit a retail delivery or shopping experience more often. Women will spend more money. The other really important nuance of a consumer group are 50 years old and older, both men and women. It's the fastest growing consumer profile in the industry. Now, these are consumers that, spent the 60s, 70s, and 80s, possibly, in quotes, consuming via the illicit market. And coming into this market, and it's really about the education that Ted was talking about earlier, coming into this market and understanding that the product that they consumed back in the 70s and 80s is completely different than the product that they're going to consume now. And the education of that consumer and understanding words like dosing, understanding what microdosing is, understanding what milligrams actually mean, not milligrams per package, but milligrams per consumption time and per delivery. Those things are really important. And so the cannabis consumer is as nuanced as every other consumer group out there. The big difference between the cannabis consumer and most of the other consumer groups is that this one's very large. So in New Frontier data, and again, this is not a plug for us. We are a data company, and so I'm going to give you some data points. There are about 157 million consumers identified in the United States, of which about 47 million consume THC on a monthly basis. About 72 million consume CBD, and then the rest they vary between monthly, quarterly, and yearly. This is not the small consumer group. Good news is these consumers, they also buy BMWs, they also buy Cheerios, they also buy Eggo waffles, Taco Bell, L'Oreal, Nike shoes, and I make that connection on purpose for the CPG companies that may be in our audience that are just looking into this industry. And this is Gary Allen's view, you don't necessarily have to come to these consumers with a cannabis specific message, right? There are endemic, as Ted was talking about, and non-endemic advertisers. And those non-endemic advertisers, and we see them coming in, their messages might go around the edges, right? They may be a behavior message that they want, and it's stereotypical, but Taco Bell, or a brand like that, that wants to come in and engage with these types of consumers where they're at in the moment of consumption. And so there are, whilst the consumer is as diverse and as nuanced as every other CPG consumer out there, data and a mature collection of an understanding of consumer marketing data will let you know that they're not only out there, but they consume marketing just as much as everybody else. And so they're very reachable, and they will engage, and they're very ready to engage. I don't know if that answered your question directly, Lisa, but I think that's.
So basically, it's a huge audience that reflects CPG and should absolutely not be ignored.
Globally, there's 344 million consumers that self-identify. There's about another 1 billion consumers that model into probabilistic behavior of cannabis and or CBD consumption. So it's a massive market.
Yeah, and it's only going to continue to grow too. I mean, one thing that we have never really seen before, unlike other regulated products, similar to maybe like alcohol, that there hasn't been one single product that can be so many different things, but is judged on the same rules. Everything from recreational to health to cosmetic, even to lubricants, where the hemp plant itself can compete against, the Exxons and Shells as a more viable product. So you have a single plant that can be so many different things, but it's still regulated at the same time. So the consumer base is going to be so diverse and so different, whether it's going to be, your traditional Nielsen demos, or it's going to be a larger, more specific, or even smaller individual set. There's going to be so much out there, but there isn't, an identity for one single product as the market continues to change. So regulation needs to be looked at a little bit differently, and that'll help us identify the specific ideal consumer as we're able to see more scale and reach.
And Joe, I'd like to get your take on this too, as far as who is the cannabis consumer, and if you could give us a little bit about how you've gotten that data and how that's evolved over time.
Sure. So who is the cannabis consumer? I think what you've heard is that pretty much everyone can be the cannabis consumer. And we really do take that approach. Now, for us, when you ask where do we get the data from, right? There really is not good consumer behavior data. We've come a long way in terms of identifying, within this discussion, programmatic networks and identification of cannabis consumers as a whole, as a group to target. But when you talk about a brand, and let's say, with Wana, we position as a premium product, right? How do I find the consumer that likes edibles, likes gummies, is a premium consumer, and really begin to pare that down? I've done some programmatic, and I got back some of the data, and I looked at it and I said, I don't think that's our target audience at all. Now that might be the result of the data and the company that I was working with. Don't know, but what I can tell you is that we continue to push more on the messaging and the format, more so than identifying the specific consumer and using that data to target certain channels. So, for example, we know that our consumer skews a little bit older, a little bit higher household income. So we are going to be using for our summer a lot of in-person actually visits with a complete setup that we're going to bring from dispensary to dispensary, really targeting that consumer at the dispensary to communicate that brand message directly to that consumer that's visiting the dispensary. And that doesn't help us in terms of sourcing new consumers, and we do have some ideas there, but that's going to also be a very much a direct connect with the consumer, because back to programmatic and the data that we can get about consumers, it really just tells us they meet these criteria, and we're gonna try and target them as best we can, but not super scalable, which is something that Ted began to talk about earlier. The idea of scalability. When I'm looking at messaging on a let's say per dispensary, specific consumer, and I really need to get that message across to 11 states and Canada, and it really does not allow me to be as scalable as I'd like to be as a brand, particularly to bring in that new consumer as well.
I think what Joe brings up is important, right? Which is that there's a couple of things, right? First and foremost, and Ted was talking about it earlier, there's a huge amount of consumer education that still needs to happen, right? There are still about 50, 60 million consumers just in the US that are interested in the product and have tried it once, but don't actually understand all of the different ways in which to interact with a cannabis or a CBD product. And so there's a massive opportunity for that top of the funnel consumer education and messaging, right? Which then feeds for, for advertisers like Joe and for product manufacturers like Joe, and especially premium brands. Okay, so that helps create the addressable market specific to those products. And as we bring that group into the marketplace with platforms, programmatic advertising, companies like MediaJel, and the services that they provide, as they start to get into the market, just like traditional CPG companies and traditional marketing in the mature markets, we will everybody on this panel, and hopefully all of the CMOs and marketing professionals that are in the audience, we will all then see that engagement and start to understand and categorize the nuances as they are specific to our individual brands or the engagement in which we seek. And so that's kind of one big part of it. Because as Ted said earlier, there's a huge bottleneck in the distribution or publishing side of the capability of distributing that content. There's still a little bit of a disconnect between the top of the funnel and the repeat customer. And that's where companies like Wana Brands and other, premium as well as value-based product manufacturers and brands, that's where they really are going to spend the next few months and year understanding that portion of their particular funnel. And when those two things come together, and we think over this next year with companies like Smart getting involved in some of the large mature market, not only data platforms, but also publishing platforms becoming involved, we'll be able to shorten that learning curve very, very quickly. And it's a kind of an exciting time to be talking about this, because what we're talking about here in June will be different than what we talk about in December.
And that tees up the next question perfectly. And Jake, I'd like you to start with this. So I'd like to talk a little bit about attribution. So to an extent, cannabis is still largely a cash-based business, and dispensaries still operate as independent retailers. And that can make it difficult for brands to do things like provide coupons and basically, find attribution and make attribution real. So Jake, what are some best practices for cannabis brands to improve attribution in their marketing efforts?
Okay, yes. Let's talk about that. There are a lot of challenges. I'm going to speak to the online portion. Most dispensaries, retailers, and delivery services at this point are using some sort of e-commerce platform. And actually a surprising number of the orders are happening online. And whether that's an actual ordering delivery or just there's a lot of order and pickup, right? So with platforms like Dutchie and Jane, which are two of the more popular ones, dispensaries are using these tools. And because they're online, we are actually able to give pretty good attribution for online orders. So we can look at, we're serving programmatic ads. We have the ability to understand, just like you have in the CPG industry, that's what we've spent our time building, is trying to bring those tools to the table and level the playing field for cannabis brands. And so we do have the ability today to say that, we served X number of impressions to this particular device or IP address or whatever marker you're using, and then correlate that to a purchase that was made on an online platform for delivery or pickup. So that does exist today, but it's not a complete system, and the industry as a whole is quite fragmented. You mentioned coupons. There's not, a universal system for that. There's a number of vendors that have those. But if you're running a retail business, you've got one platform for your e-commerce orders, you've got another platform for loyalty, and you might have a different POS system. And the way that those systems interact aren't very seamless today. And then if you're trying to, tracking the online orders is relatively straightforward now, if you have the right technology. It gets a lot murkier when you start to do offers, right? And we've run into this before, where we run an offer inside of a creative and it's, get 30% off, use this coupon code. Now you've got a problem about educating your retail staff, right? Because the retail staff needs to be able to know what that code is. They need to know to enter it correctly. And then you end up with some human error stuff where people just start using random coupon codes at the retail location because the sort of internal education is also somewhat sporadic in terms of how the actual staff members at the retail location are educated.
Anyone want to add to that about attribution and best practices?
Joe probably has some thoughts on this and some challenges.
That's who I was looking at.
Yeah, well, I'm smiling because Jake and Ted and I have talked about this probably ad nauseum. They're probably tired of hearing me say this, but the challenge for us as a brand is that attribution, and even where we have some connectivity with IR Jane. So, for example, we run Jane on our platform on the Wana Brands website. So customer can come in, see available products at dispensaries, price, reserve it. I still don't know at the end of the day that they actually made that purchase and closed the loop on that without a lot of kind of back end Herculean efforts to figure that out. But secondarily, I also can't really drive traffic on my own from a promotional perspective, because I have to work, once again, talk about scalability with an individual store on an individual basis to get that all set up, to track that code. And I can't do that broadly. I have to do it specific to a dispensary. So when we talk about, and that's just the online, right? When I talk about the offline, so far, the best that I can tell, and again, this is where we've been debating and having discussions, the best I can tell, I can understand foot traffic to a store, and I can understand total revenue lift, just whether or not I attribute it to our marketing efforts or not, but I can at least see if we've increased in revenue in a given store. Beyond that, I'm mostly working on brand recognition and just using it as a platform for brand awareness more than anything else, because the offline world of marketing for a cannabis brand like Wana is still not sophisticated enough to allow me to do really deep targeting, drive traffic to a specific store on a scalable basis with promotions and other efforts.
And that goes into the next question nicely. So legalization is moving faster than ever. We just saw New York pass adult use and Alabama pass medical here in the States, just to name a few. And now the majority of US states have some form of cannabis legislation on the books. And I know there's been a lot of speculation about the change in the federal laws this year with the change in administration. So I'll keep this open, but with legalization moving as fast as ever, what's next in cannabis marketing?
I'll just add a nuance to the question, and then I can see Gary's got some thoughts. There's a difference between decriminalization, descheduling, and legalization, right? So, and they all affect different things. For example, we were talking about 280E, which is a huge burden from a tax perspective. That's an artifact of cannabis being scheduled as a Schedule 1 substance, right? If you take cannabis off of that schedule, that actually immediately solves many of the tax issues because it's no longer in that category from a tax perspective, right? So that helps one thing. You've got the various banking laws that are trying to get through, Congress and Senate. That gives access to banking and credit. So that's another issue, right? And then you can get into full legalization, which, a lot of people don't necessarily want the federal government to just jump in and create federal laws, because that will further complicate an already Byzantine system of laws that we have to deal with. So I think that there's going to be a sequence of events that are going to happen. And I think the things that the industry needs most is the descheduling and then the banking. So fix the taxes, fix the banking, and then let the industry grow and figure things out before the federal government comes in and decides to add more laws.
Yeah, I think that's really good, Jake. And I think I think one of the most important things is federal legalization is most likely not going to come in the very short term. Safe banking. Safe banking. Sorry, am I getting? No.
You're good, Gary.
Yeah, safe banking was most likely come in, before the end of the year. And I think that actually the safe banking is going to be the first little bit of watershed, right? And because once safe banking comes in and large CPG companies and advertisers are now no longer worried about their bank accounts and their capability of transacting being interfered with by the federal government, that will allow the toe to be dipped in the sea by very large ad networks, by very large CPG companies. And I think that, so there's kind of two sides to that coin. So if we're realistic in understanding that yes, state by state legalization may happen, we could be at that tipping point where the rest of the dominoes seem to fall very quickly. As Jake said, one of the idea that the federal government will run in and start to regulate and start to make regulations and policies is probably less likely to happen. On the flip side of that, if we get the Safe Banking Act passed and we're able to, the cannabis retailers, the cannabis manufacturers, the cannabis growers are able to actually use, real banks and have access to real capital, as well as the non-endemic companies that want to start to look at this market are not afraid of interference by the federal government in their bank, their normal businesses. I think we'll see a large amount of testing, and that's probably the result for this conversation that I would say that we would be looking for, is that we want those companies, the CPG companies, both endemic and non-endemic companies, to really start getting in and understanding their consumers by testing the marketing and collecting their data and understanding their specific consumers just beyond brand building. And that activity alone, I think, will also then help the policymakers decide when and how quickly, because there's a lot of money in advertising, as everybody knows. And there's a lot of influence of the capability in capitalism of connecting a consumer and a product. And so I think that might be that final catalyst. But first and foremost, we need to get the advertisers in and start engaging with the consumers, understanding who the consumers are, what they want, and start testing that messaging.
Yeah, and I think it's a good, way to roll in and, kind of wrap it up here is, we put in a little bit of like a lightning round because, what is next, at legalization, what's going on right now, kind of, in your own words, a piece of advice to the marketers in the cannabis space that are, new, the greenhorns of it. And I think that, to your point, while everything moves slowly with legalization and the banking aspect, it still doesn't mean that it's a sit and wait. It's an opportunity now, because when it is passed or things are, open, then you add so many more players in there. And kind of the theme of this was how to choose those right players. But I think it's both for publishers and advertisers to not just pick sides, but to start to figure it out now and play within the boundaries that you have that are present. And if you figure it out, it's only going to get easier and easier for you, because it's going to get very clouded. It's going to be hard to figure out where and who to go with, because everybody's going to jump in. So right now, you need to determine the strategy that you have at the pace that the industry is at right now to really take advantage for your brand or for your publisher to not get left behind. Because it's like, you find out about a hot stock, and if you're hearing about it from your grandma or something, then you've already missed it. So now's the time to not just find the right partners, but find what the right strategy is for you.
Couldn't agree more.
So we've got about 1 minute left. We just hit 12:45. So any last parting bits of advice?
I'll jump in real quick and just say, if you have a brand or a retail operation, it's very challenging to operate today, and you need to be focused on revenue so that you can survive. But you should look at the long-term brand equity, because eventually, if you want to have a long-term business, you need to have a brand at the core of that. And so you should allocate some of your marketing budget towards those long-term goals as you're, dealing with the day-to-day marketing challenges as well.
Mine would be get comfortable with risk and experimentation. So if you're a marketer that likes the tried and true and just wants to come in and spend a lot of dollars and plug them into different channels, this is not the right place to be, because we are still very early days and there has to be a lot of experimentation, and you got to be comfortable with the fact that some of it's going to fail. Some of it might even be a little bit uncomfortable at times. So just get comfortable with that idea.
Yeah, and we tell our customers, discover, engage, and compete, right? Discover what the market is and who your consumer is. Start to engage with that consumer and learn as much as you possibly can, and then go out into the market and compete.
All right. Thank you,
Awesome.
everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yes.
Thank you.
And if I may plug, we are doing a full summit tomorrow, the Cannabis Marketing Summit. So we'll be talking about these things more in depth as well. And I'll throw that link in the chat.
Wonderful. I will see you guys all there.
Yes, we will. See you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.